to these events over the weekend.
Thank you very much to Jason Rossum. I'm joined on the programme by Alan Mendoza. Alan's the Executive Director of the Henry Jackson Society. It's a think tank. We've heard from quite a few of those this morning. It promotes European-US relations and NATO membership. Alan, good morning to you.
Oh, good morning. Good morning.
Good morning. You hear what Jeremy Corbyn is scheduled to say today. He's going to link our foreign policy with the terror attacks that have taken place here, including the Manchester bombing. And I wonder whether you agree with him, whether you think he's right.
Well, I don't want to talk about Jeremy Corbyn because it's election period. People will make up their own minds about that. What I think is important is to look at the underlying issues. And I think if you look at what ISIS themselves have been saying for the past few years, foreign policy comes down the line as a minor factor in terms of their own interest in this. They stress again and again and again it's their own ideology that matters more than anything else in terms of radicalisation, in terms of the terrorist attacks they cause against us.
When you say people will make their own minds up, that's absolutely right, but you're entirely free to put your point of view, which is why we've asked you on the programme. You don't have to censor yourself in advance of the election. That's something, if we didn't think it was appropriate to ask you, we wouldn't have invited you to be on the programme to discuss it. So I'm asking you again, is it accurate, do you think, from your knowledge of the history, the chronology and what has gone on in the area, do you think that it is accurate, just factually, to link our activities in foreign policy in the Middle East with terrorist attacks here?
Well, I've just given you my answer to that, which is that ISIS themselves, the people who are committing these terrorist attacks, have publicly stated on a number of different occasions that actually what motivates them is radical Islamist ideology first and foremost, and foreign policy is an excuse used by them at various points to radicalise people down the line. So it's not a prime issue at all here. And if you look at what's happened over many years, 25 years of this, you look at the various excuses used. In the 1990s, it was non-intervention in Bosnia. In the 2000s, it was intervention in Iraq and Afghanistan. And now it's our failure to remove Assad, which makes us complicit with him, that is often used by jihadists to radicalise others in their cause.
We have the sister of the suicide bomber in Manchester today saying that the reason for his action was the Muslim children in the Middle East and the bombs unleashed upon them by America. I'll give you the exact words that she uttered. She said, "I think he saw children, Muslim children, dying everywhere and wanted revenge. He saw the explosives America drops on children in Syria and he wanted revenge. Whether he got that is between him and God." And it's notable she didn't apologise in any particular, not to those who lost their lives, not to the families of those who've been wounded, nothing of the kind.
Well, again, I'll point to what ISIS officially say about this matter. There was a news article in the Daily Mirror yesterday that makes this quite clear. They quite cleverly picked up official ISIS propaganda magazines that state, again, quite clearly, and I won't quote it verbatim because that would be wrong, but the argument is, it says quite clearly, even if there was no invasion of Muslim lands, we would still attack you because you do not believe in our form of Islam, essentially. That's what they say. That's the argument. Now, this lady can say what she likes about this, but if ISIS officially is saying that, I think her dissembling is an excuse for what's really going on, which is that the ideology is constant over a period of years and the foreign policy excuse changes. Let's not forget where the family come from. They come from Libya, okay? They fled Libya in the 1990s from Gaddafi's regime. They came to Britain as refugees, and then which country was instrumental in removing the regime that had persecuted them? It was Britain, together with France, that removed Gaddafi.
Explain, sorry, would you Alan, sorry, no, I just want to ask you to explain, sorry, because people might not be familiar with the Libyan situation. You know, you live, eat and breathe this stuff. Other people are just living lives, trying to make a living. They're not necessarily conversant with what's going on in Libya. So I was hoping that you would explain exactly, well, what you know, why the suicide bomber's family would have had to flee Libya. Why were they being persecuted in Libya, do you think? And what happened then as a result to mean that they could go back again? What happened?
Well, of course. So this is a key point. And I think, as you say, understanding the background to this is quite important to understanding the issue about foreign policy or whatever else it might be that motivates attackers. So, as you know, for many years, the Gaddafi regime persecuted all its opponents. Some were secular, some were liberal. In this case, they were Islamists in terms of people who wanted to topple him. And, of course, it was a brutal regime that would kill you without compunction, human rights abuses galore. so on and so forth. So lots of Libyans from all spectrums of society fled Libya over a period of years. A number came to Britain. Some, of course, ended up in Manchester, of which this family were one.
Yeah.
Then they were able to, of course, subsequently return to Libya only because, if you remember, Muammar Gaddafi threatened in the course of the uprising in Syria to go house to house and literally kill every one of his opponents, which struck people around the world as being so outrageous and such an incitement to, if you like, genocide, or an act of war at the very least, that essentially the UN invoked what's called the responsibility to protect, which was, or countries invoked this, saying, including Russia, who signed on to this, including most of the Arab world, which signed on to this, that we should intervene in that Syrian civil war to stop the mass murder of civilians,
now,
which is what Gaddafi was promising.
I'm assuming, I think this is correct, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that Jeremy Corbyn at that time would have opposed that intervention, would he? Because he was historically opposed to... I'm not sure, right, but I'm wondering. I don't know.
His precise position on Libya. He might indeed want to clarify that. But this was an issue that came to the UN, was approved by the UN. They approved the intervention, and that is why, of course, it was essentially a move to stop the mass murder. And the course of stopping the mass murder, by stopping Gaddafi's military from doing this, we ended up moving the balance of the war, and Gaddafi was toppled as a result of this. But let's not forget why we went in there. We went in there by international support, including the Arab world, including neighbouring countries, who were all supportive of this. And we ended up removing Gaddafi, and that enabled the family to go back. So you can kind of look at this in the way and say, so Britain gave the family shelter. It then indirectly removed Gaddafi, who had been responsible for their persecution. How on earth is that linked to this guy's radicalization? It isn't. What is a constant throughout all of this is the radical Islamist ideology that a group like ISIS employs, and before it Al-Qaeda employed. In the 1990s, before there was any interventionism, Al-Qaeda were launching bomb plots in the West, in other places, the aeroplane plot across the Pacific, the World Trade Center attack of 1993, citing the fact that we had stopped Saddam Hussein from invading Kuwait, another internationally supported move by everyone at the time.
You see, so lots of people these days, when they call the show, they say with great authority that Saddam Hussein should have just been left to get on with it, and that nobody should have intervened, and that it was a terrible mistake, and people thought so at the time, and nobody should have got involved with it. You don't agree with that? Well,
in 1991, when he invaded Kuwait, when we responded, nobody would have taken that view, and nobody would have taken the view today if Saddam had rolled into a neighbouring country like Kuwait with its oil reserves, with other matters, trying to then project his force across the Arabian Peninsula. Nobody would think that's a good idea, given the strategic sense of it. Even today, that would be the case.
So do you feel, Alan?
The 2003 war with that war.
Okay, just to people who've just tuned in, I'm talking to Dr. Alan Mendoza. He's the executive director of the Henry Jackson Society, which is a think tank promoting European and US relations and NATO membership. Do you feel, therefore, that when Jeremy Corbyn makes the speech that we hear that he's intending to make today, in which he links our foreign policy with terrorist attacks, do you feel it is a deliberate kind of failure to communicate what really happened, or do you think he passionately believes it to be true, but you think he's wrong, or what do you think is actually going on here?
I don't have any dispute with Jeremy Corbyn if he wants to raise this issue. That's not an issue at all, as far as I'm concerned. I think we ought to discuss important matters like this as well. I think I've demonstrated in the last few minutes the viewpoint about, if you're looking actually at what the groups themselves believe in, this is not the motivating cause for their behaviour. I think in general terms, there's a lot of spilting in the West about our culpability in this, but people tend not to want to talk about the real factor, which is that there is a radical Islamist ideology out there that is rampant in certain places, and which is resulting in radicalization of our own, of sections of our own Muslim population, and attacks against our own citizens. This is not, and of course, let's remember this, most Muslims are the first victims of this. If you look at the real victims of ISIS, yes, it's Yazidis, yes, it's Christians in those areas, but it's really the Muslim populations that they've taken over and subjugated to their cause.
Okay, final question, Alan. You've been very interesting. Final question. Do you think that part of the radicalization propaganda communicates to the susceptible people who are responding to being radicalised that it is all about British foreign policy? Do you think they're told this, Or do you think they're not actually told this, but they pretend that they think this? Do you think they are? Do you think that's part of it?
I think it's a very complicated process. If you look at paths to radicalisation, there are many, many paths to radicalisation. Some can be through, if you like, gang-type environments. Some can be prison environments where you're looking to protect yourself in terms of how this works. Some are troubled people looking for a change. Some are people infused by the ideology. Some are people who may well be looking at a particular foreign policy issue. But we need to come down away from the smokescreen of the propaganda and look at what's underneath the propaganda. And what remains underneath that propaganda is a radical Islamist ideology that, once again, hates us for who we are, not what we do.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Dr. Alan Mendoza there. We're taking your calls on this, obviously, and we'll be straight back with you after this trail.
BBC Radio London.
That's the politically correct stuff. We'll do that next week. Today we're not doing any of that.